SMI stands for serious mental illness or severe mental illness, and this is the kind of mental illness that is considered gravely disabling. This is the kind of mental illness that can result in involuntary hospitalization or a huge cocktail of medication to treat it. Psychosis is often used synonymously with SMI, and I personally have an SMI. I actually have schizoaffective disorder, which has in the past been quite disabling. Now, the thing is, you'd think with such a severe mental illness, you'd be aware that you're going through it. But the thing is, I had no idea. The very nature of my disorder caused me to have a lack of insight into my symptoms. Therefore, I thought I was perfectly fine. Anosognosia is a symptom of psychosis that translates to lack of insight. And with this lack of insight, a person experiencing hallucinations and delusions will fully believe in these experiences, and despite any evidence to the contrary, they will refute it. They will say, nope, that's not real, this is real, when in fact their reality is the one that's like kind of not really going on. In this state, a person can go on indefinitely in psychosis without getting the help that they need, getting the treatment they deserve. And this was the case for me. For quite a long time, I was just blindly going through psychosis under the radar. No one knew that anything was wrong with me, although they did consider me a little bit odd. And for this reason, I didn't get treated for over a year. When I finally got the help that I needed, I got answers, and these answers came in the form of a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder bipolar type. But getting there was a long journey, and it wasn't easy. There was a lot of danger and trouble. So this is the story of that journey, my story of the road it took to get my diagnosis. Before we get started, here's a little bit of a disclaimer to say that I am not a mental health care professional, and I am in no way qualified to give any advice, medical or otherwise. Who I am simply is a person with severe mental illness who's here to share with you the wisdom and insight I've gleaned along my journey of mental health recovery. Also, a bit of a trigger warning to say that the subject of psychosis in and of itself can be a delicate, sensitive subject that at times may be difficult to talk about. So if at any point during the video I say anything that may be triggering or upsetting to you, you are more than welcome to leave. In this video specifically, I will be talking a little bit about police abuse, and if that's not your cup of tea, you're more than welcome to leave. Now, the episode of psychosis that led to my diagnosis was not my first. You see, my first episode was pretty mild, and I had awareness. I did not lose insight and could tell that I was hallucinating and having delusions. I didn't know what they were, but nonetheless, I was aware that something was going on and that it was not okay. So when I went to the hospital and told the doctors I believe I have psychosis, they didn't believe me. Unfortunately, I have come across this a lot from other people with psychosis who have been invalidated because they know they're having hallucinations and delusions, and doctors will dismiss them and they don't get the care they need and deserve, which, like me, leads to future psychotic episodes. So my first psychotic episode, which was kind of like a blip because I got on antipsychotics, I was diagnosed bipolar, and I went along my way, it really wasn't life-altering in the sense that I was completely traumatized by it. The episode that got me diagnosed, absolutely traumatizing. The thing is, it was a slow progression before it got to that point. In the beginning, it was pretty much just odd behavior. I began to have negative symptoms when I was in college, and negative symptoms are the symptoms of psychosis that present first. These are the precursors to positive symptoms of hallucinations and delusions. Now, understanding positive and negative symptoms is more than just good and bad. It's actually not that at all. Think of it more like a battery with a positive and negative side. Or think of it like testing positive for COVID. It's not a good thing that you tested positive. It is, however, a positive presence in your health that wasn't there before. So positive symptoms are additions. They are additions to reality, like the hallucinations of sensory experiences that weren't there before, or delusions being beliefs that weren't there before. They're additions. Now, negative symptoms that come on first are a subtraction. They are a loss of your experience of reality. And in my case, I had the symptoms of avolition and anhedonia. Now, avolition is a lack of motivation. And for me, this looked like not performing in school, not doing my homework, not showing up to class. It looked like not taking care of myself, not feeding myself, not taking care of my hygiene. Basically, I would just sit on my couch. That was it. I wouldn't even get up to go to the bathroom. Anhedonia was a lack of pleasure in things I normally enjoyed. I went to college for outdoor education and leadership, which meant that I majored in rock climbing and trail building and avalanche safety and mountain biking. It was really exciting stuff, but it reached the point where it wasn't exciting anymore and I no longer had any pleasure in doing it. These negative symptoms, in addition to the severe bullying I was facing in college and the ostracization from the students in my major, led me to ultimately drop out of college, which honestly was one of the best decisions I have ever made in my entire life. Partially because I was miserable in college, and partially because I didn't know it, but I was going into psychosis. And I would have hated to go into psychosis in the middle of, this like remote campus of outdoor ed students in a canyon with no one for miles. Like, that would have sucked. So when I dropped out of college, I moved to Washington, hence Psychotic in Seattle, and lost my mind. It didn't happen overnight. It began gradually. It first kind of looked like having odd beliefs. Not necessarily like delusions, but I would say speculations. I don't think they were like full blown yet, but I started to be very, very interested in occult things and metaphysics and astrology. I mean, pretty much anything esoteric really grabbed my attention. And I started to believe that I had to study this stuff voraciously because I was being called to save the world and I would need all of this knowledge. So I didn't know what knowledge I would need. I knew that I would call upon it when it was time and I would know what to do when I was ready. But until then, I just had to study. So outside of the view of people around me, in my own privacy of my home, I was going bananas, learning about clairaudience and the Celtic Buddhists in Vermont, learning about like seraphim and other hierarchy of angel stuff. I was learning about astral projection. Like, everything and anything that could grab my attention consumed me. Then came the delusions, and they were pretty scary. My delusions tend to be pretty dark, and I felt deeply unsettled by them, to say the least. One of my earliest delusions was that I was pregnant with Satan's baby. Despite the fact that I wasn't in a romantic relationship, I was not sexually active, like there was no reason for me to be pregnant, I was certain. I even went so far as to get pregnancy tests from the grocery store. And when they came back negative, it only fueled the delusion because I told myself that Satan was so tricky that he wouldn't allow his offspring to show up on a pregnancy test. So there was nothing that would sway this logic. Paranoia crept in and I began to believe that I was in a separate dimension called the mirror dimension. And there was this witch in the mirror dimension who was after me. She wanted to take me permanently over to her side of the mirror where she would harvest my soul and mine me for every bit of my essence. I was terrified of this because my mom lived in a house that had a huge mirror over the mantle of the fireplace, and I couldn't handle it. I would wear a hat and sunglasses when I'd be in that house because I believed that you couldn't get through to my mind if you couldn't see into my eyes, if my head was like blocked by a hat. Like I had these superstitions, I had these rituals. I thought my mom was going to be kidnapped and that the witch would like take over her body. And then I didn't trust my mom because I often couldn't tell, like, was she the witch? Was she after me? I really didn't know. And I was just terrified all the time. I was so terrified to be in her home, in my apartment, that I just started wandering. The wandering is pretty much just like you'd see in dementia. Basically the exact same thing. There is no destination in mind. There is no route to take. It is just blind wandering. And so I would take off and just go for miles and miles and hours and hours. I would be wandering all night, and I would do this a lot actually, usually up until I'd get picked up by the police. I would think, for instance, one time I thought that I was trying to find my soul family's house, and I had never met them before. I had never seen them. I'd never seen the house, but I believed that I would know upon arrival that I was there. So I just had to wander aimlessly, not knowing what I was looking for, until I would just stumble upon it. And of course I never found it. I don't think I ever would have found my destinations in psychosis. I just don't think that was possible. So usually the only thing that stopped me from wandering was the police. My mom was becoming very concerned. She didn't really know what was going on with me. She didn't know anything about psychosis. I don't think she really knew what hallucinations or delusions were. Like, she certainly didn't know delusions, that's for sure. And so she just thought I was acting really odd. Like, there was a police report filed at one point that I later found, in which she said that people think I'm odd. Like, that was my problem, was just that I was a little odd, and it was so much more than that. She starts getting calls from the police. She's picking me up. She's being told, hey, this is a psychiatric emergency. Your daughter's kind of a danger to herself. You really need to get her to a hospital. And she tried, but there were no beds available anywhere. So thus started a period of going in and out of ERs over and over again, trying to find a bed available, being told, come back next week, finding nothing, nada. Then came the day when it got really dangerous. I had a very paranoid delusion that the FBI was after me. Up until this point, this was a common theme. I always thought that they were tracking my phone. I thought that they had bugged my apartment. You know, I was pretty paranoid about the FBI, like, all the time. But on this day, it was particularly bad. And I thought that they were going to kidnap me. I was terrified. Now, as you can imagine, if this were really happening, anyone in their right mind would be terrified and probably do whatever it takes to save their life, because who wants to be kidnapped and tortured? That is a nightmare. So I did whatever it took. It's just that in psychosis, whatever it took seemed a lot more sane to me than it did to the rest of the sane world. And I may have publicly humiliated myself just a little bit. I was downtown in my town and panicking, fearing for my life. I thought that everybody who walked by that was looking at a phone was like texting each other my coordinates or something like that. I thought that everybody was after me. I thought that everybody was in on this and that they were like undercover agents. And so there was nowhere that I was safe because everyone's always on their phones, for one thing. And I panicked. I ducked into a bush. There was this huge bush off the side of the road that had like a deep bowl in it. And I crouched in there thinking, I gotta do something. I gotta get out of this situation. Like, how do I save my life? And I did what I thought was the smartest thing. I believed that I would be invisible if I wasn't wearing any clothes, much like the emperor's new clothes. And so I stripped naked, got out of the bush, and booked it down the street, just running for my life, terrified out of my mind. And of course I was visible to God and everyone. And some guy yelled at me, "Hey, you know you're naked?" And I just went, "I've got this. I was so scared. I didn't even care that he could see me because my life was in more danger than like the concern of being naked in public. Like that, if you're ever in a situation where you're in survival mode, you will do literally anything it takes to stay alive. It will not matter to you if you're naked, and you will have no self-preservation. You will not be the least bit concerned about any wrinkle or fold or cellulite in your body, because that mode, that survival mode, there's just nothing like that fear. Like, I couldn't have cared less. Unfortunately, the police, they found me and they came up to me real quick. A squad car pulled up right in front of me, stopping me in my tracks, and 2 police officers got out. And now I don't exactly remember the exchange, but I do remember that they didn't follow protocol. And I know people have like speculated about this with me in the past. And, you know, I believe I should have been given a blanket to, you know, cover myself. And people have said, not all police officers have a blanket. And right, like, that is such a bullshit argument, because regardless of whatever, like they have, like, usually they will have things like that for other emergencies. I think that it's just such a nitpicking argument to say, like, well, there couldn't have been anything to cover you. Like, they would find a way. Like, there absolutely has to be some sort of protocol for encountering naked people. And I do believe it should probably involve covering the naked person and not just throwing them in the back of the squad car butt-ass naked, which is what happened to me. I think right off the bat, they were total fucking creeps, and they didn't handle this appropriately at all. They actually called ahead to the station and let the people in the building at their desks know, hey, we've got a naked chick and we're gonna be arriving with her shortly. Everybody come out and line up outside of the building and wait for her. And that's exactly what they did. When I got to the station, every single officer, every single person who worked in that building had lined up along the building to watch me get paraded naked in front of them. Like, all men, just all creepy fucking men, and one woman who was at the very, very, very end of this parade, standing by the door with a blanket, and she kind of ashamedly threw it over my shoulders and said, I am so sorry for this. Now, at the time, I didn't understand what was going on. I was still too afraid for my life to give a shit that I was naked, honestly. And on top of that, I thought I was going into a spaceship. I thought that I was being abducted by aliens and taken to outer space. So, wasn't too concerned about the nudity thing. However, that sentence stuck out in my mind for years. I am so sorry about this. And I would wonder why. Why would she say that? What was she sorry about? And couldn't process what had happened to me and the trauma of it and the truth behind their actions until I spoke with someone later on, years down the road, and told her about being paraded in front of a huge group of like over a dozen men. And she said, Carolyn, that wasn't right. They weren't supposed to do that to you. That was fucking assault. Like, that's not cool. And then it dawned on me, she knew what was going on and she co-signed that bullshit. I am so sorry for this. Anyway, that was kind of the final straw in what it took to get hospitalized. That event was so enormously traumatizing to me that I very quickly found a way. Now, I didn't realize that I was like trying to get help, but I wanted help. I didn't know what was going on with me, but I knew something was wrong. I thought it was external. I didn't think it was me. I thought that I was in a world of chaos and I was in danger, that demons were after my soul. I thought all of these things were against me. Like, I was so scared, and I needed protection and I needed safety, and I needed it in the form of a hospitalization. I didn't know that that's what I was asking for. But after that event, I was so shaken that I said to my mom, Mom, please, take me somewhere. Like, don't know exactly what it was I said, but I was like, Mom, we need to go. And that was her cue. She drove like over an hour to find the nearest hospital that would take me, and I was finally admitted. Now, the hospital experience was kind of like a transition from the last delusion from the police department, that I was going into a spaceship. I believed once again that I was abducted by aliens and I was on yet another spaceship. And that kind of was a fixed delusion the entire time I was there, although there were other delusions that kind of came and went. I had an erotomanic delusion, which is a delusion in which you believe someone is in love with you, usually a celebrity, but I thought that other patients were in love with me. I also thought that people were like jumping bodies. Like, for instance, my boyfriend at the time has blue eyes, and I thought that any patient or staff that had blue eyes was my boyfriend. And I just thought he had switched bodies. So as you can imagine, that was probably a strange conversation for the people I was flirting on, right? Like, it was pretty unwarranted. I also believed that I was on a reality TV show. And now these are very interesting delusions that at the time seemed so original, but really they're not actually. They have names. So delusions of misidentification would be the delusions I was having in which I thought that my boyfriend was swapping bodies, thinking that people were not who they were. Or the Truman Show delusion, much like the movie, in which Truman is on a TV show and doesn't know it. Like, his whole life is a reality TV show and he doesn't know it. These delusions, honestly, upon learning about them, helped me a lot in coping with the trauma of my psychosis, like learning the names of these symptoms, learning that they were in fact real and that they happened to other people and not just me. It helped me a lot. But of course, at the time, I couldn't have known that. I couldn't have even known that I was having delusions at all. And so I was usually just running back and forth across the unit, running from the demons that were after me, running from the FBI that were trying to infiltrate the spaceship, like what have you. I was always scared, no matter where I was. I think I thought that going to the hospital would be a safe place for me, but anywhere I went, I was terrified. This went on for several weeks. And in those weeks, I was regularly seeing a doctor. And the thing about the psych unit is that you are in this contained place where it's pretty easy to observe you. And I was observed long enough to identify what was going on. I have schizoaffective disorder, and in order to diagnose schizoaffective disorder, you have to have a psychotic episode with a mood episode concurrently, but you also need to have a psychotic episode absent of the mood for at least 2 weeks. And in the weeks I was in the hospital, it all played out. They saw the delusions, the hallucinations, which, I mean, they didn't see what I was seeing, but they saw me go through it. They saw the moods, the acute mania that I was experiencing, and then the crash into depression. They saw me without the moods, and I don't know how they do that. Like, they must have very fine-tuned, I mean, they're very well educated, but nonetheless, my doctor was able to identify, okay, we've got a lot going on here. This girl is psychotic. She's also very manic. And sometimes she's not. Like, sometimes she doesn't have a mood at all. I get what's going on. I can see what's going on here. It's schizoaffective. Now, as I said at the beginning, I had the symptom of anosognosia. And with anosognosia, I didn't see anything wrong, and I didn't know I was having hallucinations and delusions, and therefore I did not understand the diagnosis. Like, I could not grasp it at all. So I actually have no recollection of being diagnosed. I know I've been told multiple times by my family that I have schizoaffective, where I was diagnosed, who diagnosed me, but at the time I had much more pressing matters of saving my soul from demons to worry about, like some little name for some illness that I didn't even believe I had. It wasn't until after coming out of psychosis that I could even understand the name. Although I still didn't apply it to myself, I knew logically, this is a word I've been labeled. Like, schizoaffective is what they call me. I couldn't really like accept that I'd been psychotic. I had very strong denial that even though it had happened, I could intellectually tell you I'd been psychotic, but I was so detached from that word. Like, I remembered the experiences viscerally, but I could not connect to that word. So I would tell people I had a psychotic episode, I recovered, like I'm on medication, but it didn't compute. I kept telling people I was bipolar because that was my original diagnosis. And when I was in IOP and the IOP counselor asked if anyone had had psychotic depression, and I said yes, she said, no, you couldn't have, it's incredibly rare. And all I had to offer was, but I'm bipolar. And if I had believed at the time that I had schizoaffective, I could have told her, actually, like, I am diagnosed, but I had nothing to back it up without any belief of my own disorder. So I was just kind of confused. I was in this like in-between place of, I know what happened to me and I lived through that and I remember it and I have PTSD, but that didn't happen to me. There's no way that happened to me. That was a fluke. I genuinely thought it was a fluke. I thought this will never happen again. This is like a one-off experience. This was just faulty medication. Like, this was nothing. This is not who I am. This is not what I have. This didn't happen. Unfortunately, it wasn't until a future psychotic episode in which I went off of my medication because I truly believed that I didn't have this that I realized, oh, I do have schizoaffective. I guess this is a real thing. I never want to go through this again. Shit, man, like, I'm fucked. The acceptance took years, honestly, and it took multiple episodes to finally get to the point where it was really cemented in my head, this cannot happen anymore. It wasn't enough to be diagnosed once. It wasn't enough to have a couple of episodes. I had to be like beaten into submission to the point of desperation to finally grasp and, cry uncle and say, I get it now. This is a disorder that I'm going to live with the rest of my life, and I have to take care of it daily for the rest of my life. So the road to diagnosis was traumatic for me, and it wasn't just the police trauma. It was just the symptoms themselves, the fear that I lived in constantly. Aside from the ones I've described, I had delusions of being dead. I had delusions of being maimed. I had delusions of being tortured. And it's really hard to come away from that. And it feels like something I will never be able to unlive. Like, I know it so totally that I do have the PTSD that would come with if that had really happened. In my mind, it really happened. And that experience was real, whether it happened to anyone else or not. So I take my mental health very seriously today. I didn't before. I absolutely took for granted how well the medication worked, and I would go off of my medication over and over and over again. But today, this is like a lifestyle. Like, recovery from mental illness is a lifestyle because I have to treat it every single day. I have to do something for my recovery every day. I can't just stop going to therapy and consider myself cured. I know that I will never be cured. In my last video, I talked about my remission from mental illness and how I consider myself mentally ill. But at the basis of my mind, I am always going to be mentally ill. It's the recovery that I'm in and the progress I've made and the work I put in that allows me to live a life of stability today. I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't gone through so many episodes over and over before it was completely beat into my head. Hey girl, you're schizoaffective. You always are going to be, and you're gonna have to learn how to live with this. So to anyone who is newly diagnosed, who struggles like I did in the beginning, your diagnosis is valid, your mental health is valid, your experiences are valid, and I would encourage you to dedicate yourself to your mental health, to bettering yourself, because whether you have mental illness or not, mental health can be practiced. It is something that everybody has, that everybody can work on. And it's just the case that for people with severe mental illness like us, we have to work a little bit harder. But it is possible to recover and to live a really fulfilling life with mental illness. It doesn't have to define you. The only reason I kind of let it define me is because I've made an avocation out of spreading awareness about it. But I've basically taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and turned it into a positive. And I've used it as a tool for education and awareness. So I feel that there's a lot of positive that can come out of mental illness, and you don't have to be doomed. Be patient with yourself, be gentle with yourself, and have faith it will get better. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. So thank you very much for watching my video. I truly appreciate it. I enjoyed this topic. If anyone would like to hear more stories about my experience with psychosis, I'd be happy to share them. I guess this was a bit of an experimental video because I wasn't sure if people would want to hear about, what I went through, but I think I do sort of have to qualify myself as someone who went through this too. So I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, if you'd like to support my channel, please like, comment, or subscribe. Let me know in the comments what your road to diagnosis has been like, if you are looking for a diagnosis, if you are new on your mental health recovery path, anything you have to say, I'd love to hear from you. I put out videos every every Thursday/Friday, as well as TikTok compilations on Mondays. So if you'd like to see more of my content, there is plenty coming soon. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!